Well, thanks for your long service as a housekeeper. We don't need a caregiver anymore, so we're getting a divorce today. I had been caring for my father-in-law for 15 years, stepping in for my husband and mother-in-law. Just after my father-in-law passed away suddenly, my husband, who rarely came home, appeared with his mistress. Despite the recent conclusion of the funeral, he told me in a joking tone with a smirk on his face and then thrust a divorce paper at me. Thanks for everything, old hag. I'll be expecting the compensation. Laughing derisively, the mistress standing behind my husband also looked down on me. Yes, after all my dedication over 15 years, this is your true face. I smirked inwardly as I stared intently at my husband's face, and muttered expressionlessly, "Yes, gladly." Annoyed by my attitude, Tony spat out, "What's with that attitude, Hillary?" My husband, no, this man didn't understand the situation at all. He had no idea how miserable his circumstances were going to be. My name is Hillary Irving, a 43-year-old housewife. I have been married to Tony, a company employee, for 15 years. Due to various circumstances, we have no children. Over these years, I have been constantly struggling. It was also a time of drifting apart from my husband. Tony and I met 16 years ago when I was working at a diner. I had a dream of owning my own place, and since college, I had been working part-time at this popular local diner known for its home-cooked meals, beloved by all ages. After graduating, I aimed to eventually take over the business and began working there full-time. Tony, a fresh-faced corporate worker in his second year, soon became a regular and started venting to me about his job almost every day. Talking to you, Hillary, somehow clears my mind. That's great, eat lots and do your best tomorrow. Thank you, Hillary. I initially saw Tony, 5 years younger, as a cute younger brother. As we talked more, our relationship grew closer, and about a year after we met, Tony seriously confessed his feelings. "I think I can build a warm home with you, Hillary. Please, will you marry me?" His earnest words were unlike any before, and I was unexpectedly swept off my feet. "May I think about it?" Even as I said that, my mind was half made up. Building a warm home was as important a dream to me as owning my diner. Eventually, we agreed I would continue working even after marrying, and we started our new life together. However, the dream of a happy married life with Tony was soon confronted with harsh reality. Right after the wedding, Tony announced that we would be living with his parents. His father had suffered a stroke a few years back and become bedridden, and his mother, with poor mobility, struggled with caregiving alone. Not having met them before our marriage, I was only told about this after the fact. I hesitated to live together, but Tony acted as if it was decided, leaving no room for my input, and pushed his parents' care onto me. Family should take care of family. How could I be so heartless as to send Dad to a facility or rely on strangers? But it's hard for just your mother and me to care for your father. We should at least use day services. Who's got money for that? My mom managed all this time. Now you're here, you can handle it. You're part of this family now, so stop complaining and take care of Dad and Mom. He coldly dismissed me, and from then on, Tony never listened to my objections. Half a year later, the naive and kind Tony I knew was nowhere to be found. In hindsight, from the beginning of our marriage, he had decided to treat me more like a housekeeper than a wife. But by the time I realized this, it was too late. Still, the only reason I could endure this marriage was thanks to my in-laws. From the start of our cohabitation, they were incredibly kind to me. before becoming bedridden. My father-in-law had been a dignified executive at a major company and continued to be a man of character, always considerate of his wife and me who cared for him. I'm truly sorry to burden a young person like you, Hillary. I've told Tony many times to put me in a facility, but he won't listen. While immobile, he earnestly apologized. If only I could move more, I could make things a bit easier for you. With these kind words, my mother-in-law often dabbed at her eyes. The way they treated me sometimes reminded me of my own parents, who I lost to a car accident when I was in middle school. After their death, I bounced around relatives, living a lonely life. Wanting to create a place for myself, I pursued a dream of owning a diner. Studying business management in college with the help of student loans. Eating brought back memories of the precious days spent with my parents. My mother's delicious home-cooked meals still lived in my memory, always bringing me happiness. That's why I wanted to recreate my mother's flavors in my own diner. My parents always smiled kindly at me in my memories. The nostalgic image of my parents and the compassionate presence of my in-laws overlapped, making me feel as if they were my real parents. Tony must have his reasons, but I would prefer to stay by your side, Dad and Mom, for as long as possible. As I said this, my in-laws again cried and thanked me. Building a warm home with Tony might be difficult, but cherishing my in-laws could compensate for that. With this in mind, I gave up on my dream of the diner, quit my job, and dedicated myself to home life. 15 years passed. Life wasn't easy. Within a year of our marriage, Tony rarely came home, leaving mostly just the three of us, my in-laws and me. Tony restricted my activities and gave me only the bare minimum for living expenses. You're a housewife, so you don't need much money. Be grateful I'm providing for you. Each time, he spitefully tossed me a small amount of money. Of course, what Tony gave was not enough to live on, so I dipped into my savings from before I was married. Hillary, this is for you. One day, after years of such a life, my mother-in-law quietly handed me a substantial amount of money. Mom, I can't accept this. She smiled kindly and gently pushed an envelope filled with money toward me. It's all right. You always cook such delicious meals for us. My husband is very happy with your cooking. It's very comforting. Her words and gentle smile filled my heart with joy. My father-in-law's condition had worsened over the years, and he couldn't swallow normal food anymore. So, I had been carefully preparing meals that he could eat. Yet, when Tony occasionally came home, he would always complain about my cooking. Hey, how can you serve such lousy food with a straight face? Your cooking really sucks. Are you kidding me? Laughing foolishly at his own rude words, Tony's behavior was trivial to me. I sighed quietly to myself. Wouldn't it be better to at least look at your father's face instead? Shut up. Don't tell me what to do. Eventually, Tony left the house with a sulky look on his face, perhaps unhappy that I gave no response. This behavior repeated several times, and Tony increasingly stayed away from home. Meanwhile, my father-in-law, weakened by illness, started to be frequently hospitalized. However, there was a bit of good news. My mother-in-law managed to walk almost normally thanks to her diligent rehabilitation. But probably, Tony hadn't noticed this because he remained indifferent towards his own parents. One night, unusually, Tony came home late. He entered the house with loud, stumbling footsteps, appearing to be very drunk. Hey, the master is back, and you're not even here to greet me. What a privileged housekeeper you are. Tony, not bothering to hide his true feelings, was shouting insults loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Get the bath ready. As usual, you're a housekeeper who can't anticipate needs." No sooner had he shouted this than he sprawled out on the living room sofa and began to snore loudly. I turned around to heat the bath as instructed. Just then, a familiar electronic sound hit my back. I quickly turned around and saw Tony's smartphone. The screen lit up for a moment, displaying a message adorned with the name Claire and heart emojis. I gasped involuntarily. The message read, "The trip to Hawaii was so fun. Thanks for all the bags." Then, the smartphone screen went dark again. I stood there, frozen, staring at it. Feelings of disbelief and resignation washed over me alternately. Tony was having an affair. How long had it been? Why? Such questions and emotions mixed inside me, and I instinctively covered my face with my hands. As I staggered back to my room, I noticed my mother-in-law peeking out of her room. But I said nothing and silently returned to my room. The next day, Tony was once again gone from the house before I knew it. I thought I had heard shouting earlier, but I ignored it and sat blankly. After a while, my mother-in-law hesitantly called out from outside the room. "Hillary, something happened last night, didn't it?" When she asked me directly, I burst out crying loudly. Rushing into my room, my mother-in-law hugged me. Feeling her warmth, the reality of last night hit me, and I told her loudly about what I had seen. Dark emotions kept rising in me, and I couldn't keep my voice down. While hugging me, my mother-in-law kept apologizing tearfully. I'm so sorry, Hillary." After a while, I calmed down considerably. "Hillary, you know, I've been thinking." She started to tell me about a plan she had. Just then, a loud thud came from my father-in-law's room downstairs. We hurried down to him. It seemed he had heard my loud voice. With a pale face, he apologized to me repeatedly. Seeing him in pain, I quickly called an ambulance. However, a few days after being taken to the hospital, my father-in-law passed away. Grieving, we managed to arrange his funeral. "Dad, why did you have to die?" Tony showed up at the funeral and dramatically wailed in front of the coffin. Staring blankly, I wondered what he was even saying now. As Tony cried excessively, funeral staff and a few male relatives eventually had to carry him away. After Tony was taken away, my mother-in-law and I quietly said our goodbyes to my father-in-law. Everything felt like it had ended in an instant, and I felt an overwhelming emptiness. No more tears came. Then, Tony reappeared in front of us with a young woman. In flashy attire, surely his mistress, Claire. Smirking, Tony handed me the divorce papers. "Well, thanks for your long service as a housekeeper. We don't need a caregiver anymore, so we're getting a divorce today." "Tony, what are you doing?" Ignoring his mother's angry outburst, Tony arrogantly continued. "You were just a housekeeper after all, so no compensation. I've been supporting you all this time. I could even demand compensation from you." "Be grateful," he said, smirking, while Claire grimaced behind him, which surprised me. "What are you even saying?" I thought. "That's the deal, Mom. I'll be going home with Claire from now on. Take care." Then, turning to me with a grin, Tony said, "So, get that divorce paper filed." Hearing the all-too-predictable words, I couldn't help but snort. "Yes, gladly." And with that, I turned on my heel and headed to the office. Everything was going so smoothly, it was almost scary. With that thought, I submitted the divorce papers. Feeling as if a 15-year burden was being lifted, I walked away light-footedly. Feeling lighter in both body and spirit, I started walking away cheerfully. Then, suddenly, Claire appeared. With a furious red face, she threw some words at me. I laughed silently at the thoughtless mistress in front of me, and executed another plan I had prepared. A week later, I visited my in-laws' house with someone. As I had informed them by phone beforehand, my mother-in-law smoothly opened the door. We headed straight to the living room, where Tony, seeing me, exclaimed in surprise, "Hey, why are you here?" "Because I invited her here," my mother-in-law said sharply. "First, about father's estate." As my mother-in-law spoke, Tony leaned forward eagerly. Before he could speak, the man seated next to me placed a stack of documents on the table and solemnly announced, "Father had entrusted us with his will during his lifetime." "This is who I am," the man said, offering Tony a business card. "A lawyer." "Yes," the lawyer nodded, unfolding a document. "This is the will left by your father." It stated that the property was to be divided equally. Then my mother-in-law pulled out a passbook, opened it to the last page, and placed it on the table. "This is the only property left by your father." The balance showed just a few dollars. Tony, seeing this, was shocked. "What is this?" He grabbed the passbook and examined it from end to end. "Your father needed care for 15 years. There's no way any savings would have remained." At his mother-in-law's words, Tony's shoulders slumped dejectedly. I then pressed him further. "Next, about my compensation." Hearing the word compensation, Tony suddenly looked up, his eyes bloodshot and breathing heavily. "You said you didn't need compensation, right?" "I never agreed to that." "Where's the proof?" Tony, at a loss for words, watched as I took out my smartphone. I opened an app and played a recording. "Compensation is indeed necessary." Claire's voice could be heard saying. Indeed, when I had gone to file the divorce papers, Claire had spoken to me like that. I turned to the lawyer next to me. "Will this serve as evidence?" As for evidence, during the marriage, the husband had an inappropriate relationship with another woman. So the wife fully has the right to demand compensation. The lawyer responded seriously with a slight frown. At this, Claire raised her voice in surprise. But, at that time, Tony said he could claim compensation because he supported her. At this, the lawyer let out a large sigh and stared directly at Claire, stating firmly, "Support during the marriage is the husband's duty. Neglecting this can indeed be grounds for divorce, and can lead to compensation obligations. Furthermore," the lawyer paused, taking a deep breath, and looked sharply at Claire again. "As a mistress, you too could be liable for compensation claims by the wife. In essence, both Tony and Claire must pay compensation to Hillary." Caught off guard by the lawyer's businesslike tone, Claire was momentarily speechless. However, regaining her composure, she turned to Tony and snapped, "Tony, you liar. You said we'd get a lot of money." "I didn't know either." While we all sighed deeply, thinking how could he not know? "In any case, we will be proceeding with the compensation claim. Please arrange for the payment promptly." Clearing his throat, the lawyer addressed them in a slightly pressured tone. Thanks to that, I managed to receive a somewhat generous compensation. 3 months after divorcing Tony, I was busy living alone in a town slightly removed from my in-laws. There were many things to prepare, and my days were hectic. One day, out of the blue, Tony called. "Hey, help me out. Something terrible has happened." It seemed that the last strategy we had set up was finally taking effect. Smiling inwardly, I asked my ex-husband in a solemn tone. "What happened? Is something wrong?" "It's my mom, she's acting strange." "Understood. I'll head to your mother's house right away." When I arrived at my in-laws' house after a long time, it was in a terrible state. The kitchen and dining room were particularly bad, with unwashed dishes left for days and garbage strewn about, emitting a foul odor. My mother-in-law was sitting dazed in her room, muttering something under her breath. The appalling condition made me bite my lip hard. Seeing my solemn expression, Tony frowned deeply and murmured weakly, "After you left, Mom's condition got worse. She started to act violently and didn't recognize me anymore. When I took her to the hospital, they said it might be dementia." Hearing this, I frowned even more. Tony must have initially tried to care for his mother himself, probably pushing most of the responsibility onto Claire, just as he had dumped his father's caregiving on me. Then Claire said she couldn't handle the caregiving and suggested putting her in a facility. Tony apparently has started to look for a facility without opposing Claire. Mom used to say she saved a lot of money, so when I looked for her bank book, I found lots of stock certificates instead. And when I finally found the bank book, there was almost nothing left. Tony said, ruffling his hair and spitting out the words, "Damn, this wasn't supposed to happen." Claire ran off with my bank book as soon as she found out there was no money left. Listening to Tony, I sighed deeply. He really was a despicable man through and through. Breaking up with him was definitely the right decision. How Tony interpreted my sigh, I wasn't sure, but he looked at me pleadingly. "Please, Hillary. Help me out." I closed my eyes, blocking out any more of Tony's sight. I didn't want to see his face for another second. I quickly finished what I had to do and prepared to take my mother-in-law from there. "I'll take care of your mother." Tony, seizing on my words, shouted, "Really?" I cut him off sharply. "But on one condition. You must never show your face to us again." "Agreed?" I glared at Tony with all my might. Perhaps overwhelmed by my intensity, Tony stumbled back a bit. A takeaway box crunched under his feet. Shortly after, I left the house with my mother-in-law, who quietly walked beside me, her steps surprisingly firm. I squeezed her hand tightly. That was some acting. Mom too. We both chuckled quietly. Yes, this had all been a plan orchestrated by my mother-in-law. Of course, she hadn't developed dementia nor had she squandered her assets on stocks. It was all an act to escape from Tony. The state of the house, however, had been quite terrible. "Wasn't that a bit too much?" Then she replied with a refined smile. It was a good lesson for Tony. He got what he deserved. On the night Tony's affair was exposed, my mother-in-law, while hugging me, had firmly said she would sever ties with Tony. She then suggested that we formalize our relationship through adoption. And from then, she informed me of this plan. Believing in the success of her strategy, I had been preparing and waiting. Now, we would live peacefully, just the two of us. 3 years have passed since then. I heard through the grapevine that Tony and Claire had eventually split up. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link, they say. Well, it was an inevitable outcome. With financial support from my mother-in-law, I started a diner. It is now thriving, and every day is bustling with activity. Recently, Tony showed up at my diner, looking much older than his years, despite being 5 years younger than me. "Hey, it seems you're doing pretty well. Lend me some money," he said in a servile tone. Your mother's funeral you didn't attend, did you? I gave you one last courtesy by informing you. Indeed, my mother-in-law passed away not long after that incident. Even if for a brief period, we had managed the diner together as a real family. Those days had become a precious memory for me. At my words, Tony's face contorted, but before he could speak, the regulars at the diner, all fans of my mother-in-law, started shouting angrily at him. In no time, they had kicked him out of the diner. He began shouting loudly outside. I approached Tony and presented him with a restraining order we had signed when I took my mother-in-law into my care. You haven't forgotten this, have you? I'll call the police. With a short scream, Tony fled and never returned to the diner again. Marriage? I'd had enough. While occasionally receiving proposals from regulars, I gently declined, continuing to run my dream diner, cherishing my memories with my mother-in-law.